Breaking news tonight is a major clash is now unfolding between President Trump and his battle against some of America's top universities, announcing this evening more than $2.2 billion in federal funding has been frozen for multi-year grants and contracts at Harvard. That comes after Harvard said tonight that it was rejecting a list of demands from the administration on sweeping changes and would fight back against them. Those demands came from a federal task force that the administration says is combating antisemitism on college campuses following protests against the war in Gaza. But the list of demands included things like dismantling diversity initiatives, auditing academic and hiring practices, and also installing leaders who are committed, the White House said, to implementing the changes they want to see. We saw a response from Harvard tonight, and the legal team responding to that saying, quote, "The university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government." Now, Harvard's $9 billion that's at stake here is just a fraction of the billions that the Trump administration has been targeting at schools across the country. Harvard's decision, though, appears to be the first time that we have seen a school directly refusing to comply. This comes as the Harvard faculty chapter of the American Association of University Professors and its national counterparts sued the Trump administration. My source tonight is the Harvard law professor and general counsel of the organization at the heart of this lawsuit. Andrew Manuel Crespo is here in his first TV interview since that suit was filed. And so thank you so much, sir, for being here. Given all of these developments happening tonight, can I first just get your response to the administration saying tonight that it's going to have this $2.2 billion freeze? What kind of impact does that have?
Well, thanks so much for having me. And while this cut is obviously deeply disappointing and a real blow, not just to Harvard, but to higher education across the United States, it's not exactly unexpected. The Trump administration has been threatening to withhold and then withholding millions and then billions of dollars from some of the leading institutions of higher education in the country. The impacts of those cuts will be severe. Not just to cutting-edge research, cures for cancer, cures for diseases, studies that try to understand the most cutting-edge technology, but also all of the work that happens at these universities with respect to how we study our history, the things that are essential to our democracy. There's a lot that happens at these universities that are essential to having a free democracy, and that's, I think, exactly the reason why they're all under attack. So the impact is significant, but I'm really proud to see Harvard standing up to fight.
Well, you filed your lawsuit before we saw how Harvard was going to respond tonight, and essentially you were arguing that the threat to cut this funding violates free speech and other First Amendment rights here. Given Harvard is the first school that we've seen respond this way, how does that impact your lawsuit, and what does that mean for this going forward?
Well, I think the Trump administration's decision to cut $2.2 billion from Harvard tonight makes clear just how essential this lawsuit is and how critical this fight is, and why it's so important for Harvard and really every university in the country to take a stand at this critical moment, because this is a clear, unquestionable violation of First Amendment rights. You mentioned some of the demands that the administration has made of Harvard. It includes things like trying to appoint a federally named oversight official to do an audit of every course, every department at Harvard to see if we have ideological balance to meet the Trump administration's test for what we teach and what we say at these universities. It's a transparent effort to change what is taught, what we say in our classrooms, what we teach our students, to make sure that the only things that are actually said on university campuses are things that the Trump administration wants to hear.
Swift consequences with staggering impacts. By defying the administration's demands, Harvard was hit with a funding freeze of $2.2 billion in grants.
The conversation is, what in the world is going on? There is so much uncertainty about, is any federal funding safe?
Monday night at Harvard, students swayed back and forth, simultaneously defending the university's defiance of the Trump administration and also expressing concern over what these massive funding cuts mean for cutting-edge research.
These are people who are the best in the world, and that's why they're here. So that research is sort of in jeopardy.
The freeze comes after Harvard rejected a proposal calling for policy changes, including an immediate end to DEI, an audit of viewpoint diversity, discipline for protest encampments, and reforms to international admissions.
The Trump administration is trying to make an example of the wealthy selective institutions, trying to get them to completely overhaul the way they do everything.
Harvard's president explained the university refuses to negotiate over its independence or its constitutional rights. A statement that, according to President Trump's joint task force, quote, reinforces the troubling entitlement mindset that is endemic in our nation's most prestigious universities. And Harvard said that addressing anti-Semitism remains a priority, strengthening their rules, expanding training, and supporting their Jewish community, but that curtailing research funding would not help with this important work. In Cambridge, I'm Julie McDonald, WBZ News.
This move comes after the Trump administration announced investigations into universities across the country, citing concerns of anti-Semitism or racial preferences, and threatened to halt billions of dollars in funding for universities that don't follow the administration's demands. Among the mandates in the administration's letter to Harvard were the elimination of the university's diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, banning masks at campus protests, reforming the admissions process, and reducing the power held by faculty and administrators. Harvard informed the administration that it will not accept the proposed agreement. And in a statement, the university's president said, quote, no government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. In response, the administration froze $2.2 billion in federal funding for the university, and President Donald Trump later took to social media, writing in part, perhaps Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity. Harvard's decision appears to be the first time an elite university has pushed back against those demands from the administration, and comes as other universities grapple with how to respond. Reporting at the White House, I'm Julia Benbrook.
Look, it has a profound effect on all kinds of research programs, probably most pressingly in some ways, research on curing diseases like cancer, diabetes, heart disease. But it also affects research on how to prevent recessions, research on the nature of freedom, research on democracy, and crucially, it affects the ability to provide financial aid for the more than 2/3 of Harvard students who, because of the resources that the university has, are able to not pay full tuition at Harvard College. So this is a very frontal and punitive, and I might add, unlawful attack. So I'm not at this point involved in the university's response and management to the situation, but I hope the university's response will be very firm and that the university will do what is necessary to protect its autonomy. Because I believe that one should not comply with a government that is being extra lawful. The statute that the government refers to, having to do with discrimination, has a whole variety of rules in it, that you have to give notice, that you have to have hearings, that you have to engage in a process of discussion, that your punishment has to be tied to what an institution has done wrong rather than indiscriminate, that the focus has to be discrimination. That's not what any of this is. This is an attempt to impose the kind of regulation on Harvard that is imposed by government on universities in countries that we don't think of as democracies, countries that don't have free speech protections. And so one obviously should follow the law, but that does not mean obeying government edicts when those edicts are themselves extra lawful. That's why we have courts. And so if it comes to that, there'll be litigation. Yes, I think that in all kinds of ways with respect to prejudice, with respect to anti-Semitism, with respect to making sure that all views are represented, with respect to making sure that order is maintained, that universities are in need of a great deal of reform, and it's come too slowly. But that's not a reason why the government can entirely suspend the law and make up self-serving political demands and impose them on universities. That they should think about the United States the way they have traditionally thought about developing countries, that you can't predict what's going to come next, that you have to put a major uncertainty factor into every dealing and every relationship that you have, that it depends less on the rules and more on who you know. And so countries, businesses, they have in their playbook dealing with situations like this. It's just it was never in their playbook for dealing with the United States. It was in their playbook for dealing with what we call developing countries much poorer, less democratic, and more erratic than the United States. And that kind of skepticism applied to the United States is going to make everything harder and more difficult for us. We're going to pay more. People are going to be slower to invest. We're going to have fewer partners. And that's why the pattern has been absolutely clear for the last 12 days since Liberation Day, when the administration is reinforcing its policies, everything in markets goes down. When it looks like the administration is seeing the light and pulling back, markets rally. So at least the judgment of the markets matches the judgment of economic experts that this is about when this mistake is going to get unmade.